Now we're bouncing right on to idea number 2, which I call the Voltaire, make an impact with questions. And this is an interesting transition because questions are kind of the one thing you probably shouldn't do in a letter. I mean, you could write a letter asking a bunch of questions, but by the time you mail that out, it takes weeks, they receive it, they write you back. It's just very inefficient communication. But questions belong in another type of communication, and that is face-to-face or networking events. So why is this called the Voltaire? Well, Voltaire has a famous quote, "Judge a man by his questions rather than by his answers." Now, I want to give you an example of where I saw this having a real-life effect. In my job, I'm a franchise development consultant, which means I work with a territory of broker owners and I help them work on their business. And really, every broker has 3 main objectives. They want to recruit new agents, they want to retain the great agents that they have, and they want to help develop those agents. So in this particular instance, we'll call the broker Bob, that's not his actual name. Bob was trying to recruit an agent in his city, and he was really determined to get this agent. She was a high producer and thought that she would be a great addition to his office. But he was really upset. He called me and he explained that despite what he thought was a great recruiting interview, that she ended up choosing another brokerage in the city. And so I asked Bob to run me through how the interview went. And so he told me, he sat down with the agent, we'll call her Sally. So Bob sat down with Sally and he said, "Sally, listen, we've been tracking your production the last few years and it is impressive, but we think we can help bring your business to another level. There's a few reasons for that. First off, we have the highest producing agents on average out of any office in the city. Second, the RE/MAX brand recognition is 91% among consumers. So you don't have to explain what you do for a living. People just know when you wear that balloon pin. Third, we have training that we are constantly offering each of our agents, virtual and in person, hybrid training. Sally, this is the office for you." Sally didn't end up going to that office. I fundamentally believe had Bob's conversation, his recruiting interview, included more questions, the odds of Sally joining his office go way higher. Let me explain. So Bob sits down with Sally and he says, "Sally, tell me a little bit about what you want to accomplish in your career." And Sally says, "Well, I've had a great few years, but I think I can reach another level." Bob says, "Well, what's holding you back?" Sally says, "Well, there's a few issues. Don't get me wrong, I love my broker owner. She is amazing, but our office only has so much training. I've been through all of the training, and I still have to explain what I do for a living. People don't know our real estate company. So I have to start every appointment that way by explaining what I do for a living. And I have to hire a third-party marketing company to help me out as well. And I think that perhaps in another environment, I could have more success." So Bob continues to ask a few more questions and get as much information out of Sally as possible. And then Bob can revert to that initial conversation. But now he is equipped with the information he got from Sally. So he says, "Sally, you mentioned that you have another gear left in you. I couldn't agree more." And that name recognition issue, RE/MAX is known by 91% of consumers. You ask 91% of consumers to name a real estate company, they will name RE/MAX. You no longer have to explain your brand. And the training you mentioned, well, that is something our office offers multiple times a week, a combination of virtual training and in person. Sally, this is the office for you. That shift in asking questions, I believe, gives Bob a higher chance of recruiting. But it's not just me speculating at that. Research shows that people who ask questions, especially follow-up questions, are more liked by their conversation partners. Now, this makes sense. If you think about any networking event you've been to where you're in a group of people and there's a conversation on a particular subject. So let's say everyone's talking about sports. Somebody's telling a story, and what everyone else in the conversation is doing is they're racking their brains trying to think of a relevant story that they can incorporate in the conversation. But what's more rare is that people are actually listening and asking follow-up questions to those people who are telling their stories. Now, this research I mentioned, it comes from a 2017 Harvard research study where they took different groups of people, and in some groups, they asked one conversation partner to ask a lot of questions in the conversation. Other groups, they said, just proceed as normal. And the final group, they said, purposefully don't ask questions, don't ask follow-up questions. And when they rated how satisfactory these conversations were for the other person who was involved in the conversations, consistently they found that those who asked more questions were more liked. They found that when people ask more questions, they are perceived as higher in responsiveness, which is an interpersonal construct that captures listening, understanding, validation, and care. By the way, this experiment included a speed dating element. And in the speed dating scenario, those people who asked more questions were more likely to get a second date. So here is the Voltaire challenge. Over the next month, I want you to make a point of asking more questions in every conversation you are in, whether it's a conversation in the elevator or with one of the admin staff in your office, or again with your spouse or your kids. I want you to imagine that somebody is keeping score. You get 1 point for every question you ask, and at the end of every conversation, I want you to win by asking more questions.